The void before creation remembered both of them long before cosmologies could name a hunger or a chaos. In that slow remembering, a shape formed that would wear the mantle of appetite, and another that would take the shape of dissonant annihilation. And from those shapes the myths of Galactus and Unicron were born. For an age that stretched impossibly thin, worlds were counted and balanced. Galactus wandered the star fields, a necessity given the calculus of existence, a living law that consumed to prevent greater collapse, a being whose hunger was also a safeguard. He fed not out of malice, but because the architecture of reality required a drain. By consuming, by transmogrifying, by converting, he maintained an equilibrium that allowed lesser beings and fragile patterns to exist. Unicron, on the other hand, was the aberrant axis, a will of devouring tempest that answered only to entropy's purest impulse. Not a steward but a storm, an intention to unmake and to gnaw the scaffolding of cosmos until the bones of creation rang hollow. Both were primordial, both operated at scales that made planets seem like insects, but their logics diverged. One embodied ordered consumption that preserved the possibility of being. The other embodied disruptive consumption that sought to end being. In the prelude to conflict, those differences became a philosophical battlefield as decisive as any physical clash. Galactus, in the hushed courts of cosmic sentience, argued that the universe requires limits and outlets, that unchecked accumulation, whether of energy, of mass, of narrative consequence, produces singularities that poison possibility. He was the patient surgeon, removing gangrene to prevent the death of a limb. Unicron answered with brutal clarity, decay is natural, and total dissolution returns all forms to the indifferent womb. Preservation is a vanity that prolongs suffering and sows new monsters. Their debate was not rhetoric for its own sake, but the articulation of operational metaphysics that would determine tactics. If Galactus was right, then consumption aimed to relevance could be self-limiting and restorative. If Unicron was right, then every act of preservation was a postponement of inevitable annihilation. Galactus's heralds bore witness to the nuance of his hunger. They spoke of worlds reformed into nebulae of possibility after he took what they could not sustain. Unicron's children, metallic and malformed, sang of converted suns and the silence that followed. The cosmos itself became their amphitheater, neutral observers watching which logic would prevail. Prophets and philosophers from star kingdoms argued over whether the end justified any means. Engineers and priests prayed to whichever deity promised continuity or release. The tension mounted because their conflict was not merely to titans, trading blows, but to paradigms of cosmic stewardship, each with its own internal ethics. In hidden places where the fabric thinned, echoes of this debate altered small realities, civilizations that chose to sacrifice a world to Galactus were spared violent consumption by Unicron later. Those that clung to their worlds in defiance found themselves appetites for Unicron's hunger, their resistance only prolonging a more complete devastation. Thus a moral calculus crystallized, restraint, and the painful necessity of ceding some things to allow others to flourish, versus the brutal egalitarianism of absolute annihilation. Galactus's presence in the deep made him, paradoxically, less monstrous to many than the smiling maw of Unicron. Even so, the universe had room for both logics to roam, and so inevitability ranged them on a collision course. The signs were not thunderclaps, but subtler. Star cores stuttered as Unicron moved through a sector. Planets as if exhaled. Galactus felt anomalies in the Great Hunger, resonances that suggested another will was feeding on the same ledger. When their horizons finally brushed, the bifurcation of metaphysical purpose clarified into intent. Galactus prepared with measured ritual, drawing nourishment from the lattice of existence, augmenting his power cosmic until his purpose shone like a slow-burning sun. Unicron reassembled suns into his chassis, integrating worlds into his gnashing mouth. He became a constellation of ruin that rolled across the void like a black tide. Allies were scarce because this was a calamity that rewrote allegiance. Primus and the ancient machine intelligences aligned with survival of pattern. Cosmic beings who revered balance watched and waited, for their own principles were at stake. In whispered councils, Galactus spoke not of conquest, but of difficult mercy, a calculus of sacrifice to avert a later, total consumption. Unicron's rumble answered that mercy was cowardice. The stage was set not only as a contest of force, but as a trial of what the cosmos would accept. As legitimate continuation, the first sparks of combat were metaphysical. Unicron attempted to convert the void into a single mouth, a singularity of negation. Galactus responded by partitioning the available energies, sealing off channels of corruption and converting Unicron's devouring streams into stable flows of radiance that could be integrated and repurposed. For every world Unicron corrupted, Galactus attempted to transmute the corruption into a star mote. A seed. For every system Galactus consumed, Unicron tried to unmake the memory of the act, to erase the ledger. This was the long knife between them. Who would write the rules into the bones of the cosmos? The philosopher beings who observed measured outcomes and whispered that the victor would be the one whose principle could be internalized by the universe itself. The narrative bent toward a larger symmetry. A victory for Unicron would mean an irreversible march to silence. A victory for Galactus would mean the institutionalization of a painful, necessary appetite that could be regulated to sustain a plurality of futures. Thus their battle became pre-justified in the mindscape of the cosmos, a trial whose judgment would not only settle a score, but define whether existence would prefer preservation with cost or release without return. The machines of Primus and the remnants of celestial orders prepared contingencies, yet even they knew that when two such archetypes collided, the outcome would depend more on metaphysical righteousness than on fleets or weapons. So the stage was set, the philosophies sharpened, and the cosmos braced for the meeting that would answer a fundamental question. Can a hunger that preserves outlast a hunger that destroys? The answer would be found not only in force but in the ability to translate victory into enduring law. And that translation would be Galactus's true battleground in the approach to the final clash. The void leaned forward to watch. The clash came with the slow crescendo of cosmic inevitability. Unicron arrived as a choir of dying suns, a planet eater whose very orbit destabilized realities. His form was a cathedral of gears and teeth, a universe-consuming god that approached with grinding intent and a logic of erasure. Galactus answered in a quieter, terrible radiance, a presence that rewired local causality as he extended tendrils of the power cosmic to encompass and to judge. The first contact was a collision of metaphysical aims. Unicron hurled entire solar masses, as if they were pebbles, attempting to overwhelm Galactus's capacity for balance by sheer annihilative pressure. Galactus, steadied by his function as a consumer of excess, absorbed and redirected that pressure, transmuting raw chaos into structured outputs, nebulae of potential instead of rubble. Unicron's assault mutated. He sought to infect the power cosmic itself, to make the energy a vector of destruction. Galactus responded by sacrificing portions of his own essence, letting the hunger become a surgical instrument, excising the corrupting influence and sealing the wounds to the fabric. The battle moved beyond spectacle into ethics and acted as physics. Each strike tested whether the universe would accept sacrifice for continuation, or whether it would acquiesce to final silence. In a pivotal clash, Unicron attempted to swallow the concept of purpose itself, twisting meaning into entropy. Galactus, with a decision that mirrored his earlier philosophical stance, chose to become more than a force. He chose to be an exemplar and a law. He burned himself into the surrounding substrata of the multiverse, a luminous injunction that altered local causality. From then on, certain energies would be prone to conservation and redirection rather than unbounded consumption. Unicron, for all his might, could not easily overwrite a law that had been made manifest in the bones of reality itself. He struck with everything, fracturing timelines and spitting temporal shards. But each rupture snapped back as the power cosmic reckoned possibility into patterns that favored regulated consumption. In the end, Unicron remained a terror, massive and furious, but his assaults were funneled into channels that could not achieve total erasure. Exhausted and diminished, he staggered back into the dark, his form wounded and his will fractured. Galactus stood altered and costly in his victory, his essence thinned by the choices that had made his law permanent. The universe bore scars of the duel, and in those scars the philosophical verdict was evident. The cosmos chose continuation under difficult rules rather than obliteration. Galactus, having enacted his principle in the very arithmetic of existence, became the victor not through annihilation of his foe alone, but by binding the conditions of victory to a new metaphysical order that favored regulated preservation over absolute destruction. Galactus was the winner,